The 1964 Cadillac Coupe de Ville was more than just a car. In Harlem, it was a rolling declaration of sovereignty. It was powder blue, with white wall tires that gleamed like fresh snow, and chrome that caught the afternoon sun, scattering it across the pavement of 125th Street. Behind the wheel sat Mamie Johnson, the queen of Harlem. She drove with the easy confidence of a woman who knew exactly who she was and, more importantly, whose protection she lived under. The back seat was filled with brown paper bags from the upscale grocer on the Upper West Side, steaks for Ellsworth, fresh vegetables, a bottle of the expensive scotch he preferred. It was a domestic Tuesday, a day of running errands and preparing for a quiet evening at the Lenox Terrace penthouse. Mamie adjusted the rearview mirror, catching a glimpse of her own reflection. She looked impeccable, as always. Her hair was perfectly coiffed, her pearl earrings caught the light, and her lipstick was a sharp, defiant red. She was the wife of Bumpy Johnson, and she wore that title like a suit of armor. In a world that often looked down on women who looked like her, Mamie walked with her head high. She turned right onto Lenox Avenue, humming along to the jazz tune playing low on the radio. The city felt alive today. The sidewalks were bustling, children were playing hopscotch near the hydrants, and the rhythm of the neighborhood felt steady, predictable, safe. Then, the siren wailed. It was a sharp, intrusive sound that cut through the jazz and the hum of the engine. Mamie frowned, checking her speedometer. She was doing 25 in a 25 zone. She signaled and pulled the massive car over to the curb, assuming the police cruiser needed to pass her to get to an emergency. But the cruiser didn't pass. It pulled in behind her, close, aggressive. The red lights spun, reflecting off the pristine chrome of her bumper. Mamie sighed, tapping her manicured nails on the steering wheel. Just a ticket, she whispered to herself. Just a misunderstanding. She watched in the side mirror as two officers stepped out. They were white, uniformed, and moving with a swagger that made Mamie's stomach tighten. She knew the local beat cops. Bumpy paid enough into the Policemen's Benevolent Association to ensure that most officers waved at her car rather than stopped it. But she didn't recognize these two. The first one, the driver, was tall and broad-shouldered, with a face that looked like it had been chiseled out of granite and left unfinished. His name tag read Miller. He approached the driver's side window, not with the professional detachment of a traffic cop, but with a smirk playing on his lips. His partner, a shorter, stockier man named O'Halloran, walked around to the passenger side, peering into the windows with blatant, invasive curiosity. Mamie rolled down the window. "Good afternoon, officer. Was I speeding?" Officer Miller didn't answer immediately. He leaned down, resting his forearms on the doorframe, invading her personal space. He smelled of stale coffee and tobacco. His eyes, pale and watery, roamed over her face, her neck, and settled on the pearl necklace. "Nice car," Miller said, his voice a low drawl. "Awful nice car for a girl like you to be driving around." Mamie stiffened. She knew that tone. It was the tone of a man who needed to feel big by making someone else feel small. "It belongs to my husband," she said coolly. "Husband?" Miller repeated, looking back at his partner. O'Halloran chuckled, a wet, unpleasant sound. "Hear that, O'Halloran? Her husband bought it." "Must be a rich man," O'Halloran shouted through the glass. "I need to see your license and registration," Miller said, snapping his fingers. Mamie reached into her purse, her movements slow and deliberate. She handed over the documents. Miller glanced at them, reading the name Johnson. The name rang a bell. He didn't show it. Or perhaps, in his arrogance, he simply didn't care. "Get out of the car," Miller said, slipping the license into his pocket. Mamie blinked. "Excuse me? For a traffic stop?" "I said get out of the vehicle," Miller commanded, his hand dropping to rest on his baton. "We have reason to believe this vehicle is transporting narcotics." "Narcotics?" Mamie's voice rose an octave. "I have groceries in the back. You are welcome to check them." "We'll check everything," Miller said, stepping back and opening her door. "Out. Now." Mamie hesitated. Every instinct screamed at her to lock the door, to drive away, to find a phone booth and call the precinct captain who was on Bumpy's payroll. But she knew the reality of the street. If she resisted, if she fled, they would shoot, and the papers would say she was fleeing a drug bust. She stepped out of the car. The autumn air felt suddenly cold. "Hands on the hood," Miller barked. Mamie walked to the front of the Cadillac. She placed her hands on the warm metal of the hood. Passers-by were starting to stop and watch. She felt a flush of humiliation heat her cheeks. She was Mamie Johnson. People looked up to her. And here she was, being treated like a common criminal on the corner of Lenox Avenue. "Spread your legs," O'Halloran said, coming around to join Miller. He was smiling too. It was the smile that chilled her the most, a look of anticipation. "This is unnecessary," Mamie said, her voice trembling with suppressed rage. "I am just going home." "Quiet," Miller snapped. "Partner, check the car. I'll search the suspect." O'Halloran dove into the back seat, ripping open the paper bags, throwing the vegetables and the expensive steak onto the floor of the car, trampling them with his muddy boots. Miller stepped up behind Mamie. "Gotta be thorough," he whispered in her ear. "These female couriers hide dope in all sorts of places." He began the pat-down. It started professionally enough, a quick check of her sides. But then his hands lingered. He ran his palms down her hips, pressing too hard, moving too slow. He wasn't searching for contraband. He was searching for power. He moved his hands across her stomach, then up toward her chest. Mamie flinched, trying to pull away. "Officer, stop!" "Stand still," Miller shouted, shoving her forward so her chest collided with the hood of the car. He laughed. It was a loud, barking laugh that echoed down the street. He looked at the people watching, daring them to intervene, then looked back at Mamie's defenseless form. "You're hiding something," Miller said, his voice dropping to a greasy whisper. "I can feel it." He moved his hand again, sliding it down her thigh, his fingers digging into her flesh, moving inward. It was a violation. It was an assault masquerading as police work. He wasn't looking for drugs. He was taking what he felt entitled to. Her dignity, her space, her body. Mamie didn't think. She reacted. She spun around, her eyes blazing with a fury that superseded her fear. She swung her hand and connected hard with the side of Officer Miller's face. Crack! The sound was sharp and shocking. Miller stumbled back a step, a red handprint blooming on his pale cheek. The laughter died in his throat. His eyes went wide, then narrowed into slits of pure malice. "You little," Miller snarled. He didn't reach for his cuffs. He reached back and slapped her. It wasn't a warning tap. It was a full-force backhand. His knuckles caught Mamie on the cheekbone, snapping her head to the side. The force of the blow sent her stumbling against the car fender. She tasted blood. Her pearl earring flew off, skittering across the pavement into the gutter. Mamie gasped, clutching her face, tears of shock springing to her eyes. Miller stepped into her space, towering over her. He grabbed her by the lapels of her expensive coat and yanked her close. His breath was hot on her face. "You think because you drive a fancy car you can touch a police officer?" Miller hissed. "I should drag you down to the station right now. I should throw you in a cell with the animals and let them teach you some manners." O'Halloran came around the car, looking nervous but excited. "What did she do?" "She assaulted an officer," Miller spat. Mamie stared at him, her chest heaving. "My husband." "I don't care about your husband," Miller shouted, shaking her. "I know who you people are. You think you run this city? You're nothing. And let me tell you something, sweetheart. You tell anyone about this. You make a complaint, and we won't just come for you." He leaned in closer, his voice dropping to a terrifying serpentine whisper. "We know where you live. We know where you shop. And we know you have kids. Accidents happen every day in this city. Little kids run into the street. Houses catch fire." Mamie went cold. The threat hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. It wasn't just about her anymore. They were threatening her family. Miller shoved her back against the car. "Get out of here, before I change my mind and strip search you right here on the sidewalk." He laughed again. He looked at O'Halloran, and they both laughed. Two hyenas standing over a wounded lioness. Mamie didn't say a word. She couldn't. Her throat was closed tight with terror and shame. She scrambled back into the driver's seat, her hands shaking so badly she could barely turn the key. She threw the car into drive and pulled away, the tires screeching slightly. In the rearview mirror, she saw them standing there. Miller was rubbing his cheek, but he was grinning. He looked proud. The drive to Lenox Terrace was a blur. Mamie didn't hear the music anymore. She didn't see the neighbors waving. All she could feel was the phantom sensation of his hands on her body, the sting of his knuckles on her face, and the crushing weight of his threat against her children. She pulled into the garage, parking the car haphazardly. She sat there for a long time, gripping the steering wheel, trying to stop the tears. She was the queen. She wasn't supposed to cry. But the queen had been dragged through the mud, and the armor felt cracked. She checked her face in the mirror. Her cheek was swelling, turning a dark, angry purple. Her lip was split. She tried to fix her hair, tried to wipe away the blood, but the damage was done. She took a deep breath, grabbed the remaining grocery bags from the floor where O'Halloran had thrown them, and walked to the elevator. She had to tell him. She had no choice. The penthouse was quiet. It smelled of lemon polish and cigar smoke, a comforting, masculine scent that usually made Mamie feel safe. Bumpy Johnson was sitting in his favorite leather armchair by the window, overlooking the city that he ruled. He was wearing a silk robe over his trousers, a glass of amber whiskey in his hand, reading the evening edition of the newspaper. He looked up as the door opened, a smile already forming on his lips. "You're back late, Mamie. I was starting to think you ran off with the butcher." He folded the paper, waiting for her witty retort. It didn't come. Mamie stood in the entryway, the grocery bags slipping from her fingers to the floor. The sound of glass breaking inside one of the bags, a jar of pickles perhaps, punctuated the silence. Bumpy frowned, standing up. "Mamie?" She stepped into the light. Bumpy stopped. The smile vanished from his face, as if it had never existed. His eyes, usually warm when they looked at her, went flat and dead. He took in the disheveled hair, the missing earring, and then the bruise, the dark, swelling welt on the side of her face, the cut on her lip. He didn't rush to her. He didn't shout. Bumpy Johnson moved with the terrifying stillness of a predator that has just spotted a threat. He walked over to her, his movements fluid and controlled. He reached out a hand, hovering gently near her face, but not touching the bruise. "Who?" The word was barely a whisper, but it carried enough weight to crush a building. Mamie looked at him, and the dam broke. She collapsed into his chest, burying her face in his robe, sobbing. "Ellsworth, I was just driving." Bumpy wrapped his arm around her, holding her up, supporting her weight. His other hand still held his glass of whiskey. "Shh, I've got you. Come, sit." He led her to the sofa. He sat her down and kneeled in front of her. He took a handkerchief from his pocket and gently dabbed the blood on her lip. "Tell me," Bumpy said. His voice was calm. It was the calm of the eye of the storm. Mamie took a shuddering breath. "2 of them. Cops. But I didn't know them. They pulled me over on Lennox. They said they were looking for drugs." Bumpy's eyes narrowed. "Did they arrest you?" "No," Mamie wept. The big one, Miller. He made me get out. He put me over the hood. He said he had to search me." Bumpy went very still. "Search you?" "He touched me, Ellsworth. He put his hands everywhere. He wasn't looking for drugs. He was enjoying it." Bumpy's jaw tightened. A muscle feathered in his cheek. "I slapped him," Mamie confessed, looking down. "I couldn't help it. He was touching my legs, moving up. I just hit him." "Good," Bumpy said softly. "He hit me back," Mamie whispered, touching her bruise. "He punched me in the face. And then he told me that if I said anything, he said they knew where we lived. He said they knew about the kids. He said accidents happen to children." The silence that followed was absolute. The sounds of the city outside seemed to simply cease to exist. The air in the penthouse grew heavy, charged with a violent electricity. Bumpy stared at his wife. He looked at the woman he loved more than life itself, the woman he had built this empire to protect. He saw the fear in her eyes, a fear that he had sworn she would never have to feel. He was holding his whiskey glass in his right hand. It was a heavy crystal tumbler, thick and durable. As Mamie watched, Bumpy's hand tightened around the glass. His knuckles turned white. His eyes were staring at a spot on the wall, seeing nothing but red. Crunch. The sound was sickening. The heavy crystal didn't just crack. It pulverized. The glass shattered in Bumpy's grip, exploding into shards. Mamie gasped. "Ellsworth!" Whiskey and blood, dark red blood, poured down Bumpy's hand, dripping onto the pristine Persian rug. Shards of glass were embedded in his palm. A large piece was sticking out of his thumb. Bumpy didn't flinch. He didn't look at his hand. He didn't open his fingers. He just kept squeezing, grinding the glass into his own flesh, using the physical pain to anchor himself, to keep the tsunami of rage inside him from tearing the room apart. "Ellsworth, your hand!" Mamie cried, reaching for a towel. Bumpy gently moved his hand away from her, ensuring no blood got on her dress. He stood up. He walked to the trash can and opened his hand, letting the shards and the blood fall. He wrapped a napkin around the wound, pulling it tight, his face devoid of any expression of pain. "Miller," Bumpy said. It wasn't a question. "Miller," Mamie confirmed, trembling. "And O'Halloran, a beat cop car, number 402. Bumpy nodded. He walked to the phone. He didn't dial the hospital. He didn't dial the police station. He dialed a number that belonged to a pool hall on 116th Street. "Zip," Bumpy said into the receiver. His voice sounded like grinding stones. "Get Junie. Get the car. Come to the house. Now." He hung up. He walked back to Mamie. He kissed her forehead, right above the bruise. "Go wash your face, baby," Bumpy said softly. "Take a warm bath. Put on your robe." "Where are you going?" Mamie asked, fear creeping back into her voice. "Ellsworth, they are police. If you do something, if you go after them, it's war." Bumpy looked at her. His eyes were dark voids. "They touched my wife," Bumpy said. "They threatened my children. That isn't war, Mamie. That is a death sentence." "Please," she whispered, "be careful." "I am always careful," Bumpy said, "but tonight I am going to be thorough." 30 minutes later, Zip and Junie Bird were standing in the living room. They were hardened men, used to the violence of the trade, but even they looked unsettled by the sight of Mamie's face and Bumpy's bandaged, blood-soaked hand. "Cops?" Zip asked, his voice low. "Strangers," Bumpy said. "Miller and O'Halloran, driving car 402. "I don't know 'em," Junie said, shaking his head. "Must be transfers from downtown to the Bronx. The local boys wouldn't dare." "Fine them," Bumpy ordered. "I want to know who they are. I want to know where they live. I want to know where they drink. And I want to know if they've done this before." "Done what?" Zip asked. "Use the badge to put their hands on women," Bumpy said, the temperature in the room dropping again. Zip nodded. "We're on it, boss." They left. Bumpy sat in the dark living room, watching the lights of the city. His hand throbbed, a dull, rhythmic ache that matched the beating of his heart. Every time it throbbed, he saw Miller's face. He saw the handprint on Mamie's cheek. Midnight approached before the phone finally rang. Bumpy picked it up. Talk. It was Zip. "We got 'em, Bumpy. Took a few hours to track down their files. They transferred from the 9th Precinct 2 months ago. Excessive force complaints, but the union buried 'em. And Bumpy..." "What?" "We did digging. Talked to some of the girls working the corner of 125th, and a waitress at the diner. These guys, it's a pattern. They pull over women driving alone. Black women. They do the drug search routine. They touch 'em. They humiliate 'em. Most of the women are too scared to talk because these guys threaten to plant dope on them or hurt their families." Bumpy closed his eyes. It wasn't an isolated incident. It was a hobby. They were predators hunting in his kingdom, using the law as a shield. "Where are they now?" Bumpy asked. "They went off shift at 8, Zip said. "They live in Queens, Flushing, 2 stops apart. They're at home, tucked in." "Good," Bumpy said. "Get the boys, the quiet ones. No guns. I want ropes. I want tape. And I want a van." "What's the play, Bumpy?" Zip asked. "We gonna hit 'em at their house?" "We're going to pluck them," Bumpy said. "Quietly. I don't want the wives to wake up. I don't want the neighbors to hear a dog bark. I want them to go to sleep in their beds and wake up in hell. And then bring them to the old warehouse by the docks," Bumpy said. "The one with the soundproofing." "You want us to finish them?" "No," Bumpy said. "I want you to prepare them. I'll handle the rest." Bumpy hung up the phone. He stood up and walked to the sideboard. He poured another glass of whiskey, this time with his left hand. He drank it in one swallow. He looked down at his bandaged hand. The blood had seeped through the white linen, a stark red stain. He walked to the bedroom. Mamie was asleep, fitfully, the sedative he had given her finally taking hold. He looked at her bruised face one last time. He felt a cold resolve settle over him, displacing the red rage. Rage was messy. Rage made mistakes. What he needed now was precision. He went to his closet and changed. He took off the silk robe and put on a dark suit, a black turtleneck, and soft-soled shoes. He grabbed his heavy wool coat. He didn't take a gun. He wouldn't need one. He walked out of the apartment, taking the service elevator down to the garage where Zip was waiting with the car. "Ready, boss?" Zip asked as Bumpy slid into the back seat. "Drive," Bumpy said. As the car slipped out into the Harlem night, Bumpy Johnson lit a cigar. The flame illuminated his face for a brief second, revealing eyes that held no mercy, no hesitation, and absolutely no forgiveness. The monsters thought they were the hunters. They thought the badge made them untouchable. They were about to learn that in Harlem, the king outranked the law, and the king was coming to collect. The car merged onto the highway, heading toward Queens. The city lights blurred past, indifferent to the violence that was about to unfold. Bumpy watched the smoke from his cigar curl up against the window. He thought about the whiskey glass shattering in his hand. He thought about the blood. He hoped Miller and O'Halloran enjoyed their sleep. It would be the last peaceful moment they would ever have. The Queens neighborhood of Flushing was a world away from Harlem. Here, the lawns were manicured squares of green, the fences were white pickets, and the silence of 3 a.m. was broken only by the chirping of crickets, not sirens. It was a place where people felt safe, especially people like Officer Miller. Miller lived in a modest 2-story house on a cul-de-sac. He slept soundly next to his wife, his breathing heavy and rhythmic, the deep sleep of a man with no conscience. He had gone to bed feeling powerful. He had retold the story of the traffic stop to O'Halloran over beers at a local bar earlier that evening, laughing about how the fancy lady had shaken like a leaf. He felt untouchable. He didn't hear the lock on his back door click open. Zip was a master of the lockpick, a skill honed over decades in the trade. He moved like smoke through the kitchen, avoiding the creaky floorboards he had identified during his reconnaissance an hour earlier. Behind him were 2 of Bumpy's most reliable enforcers, Tiny and Big Earl. They wore soft-soled shoes and dark clothes. They carried no guns, only heavy canvas sacks and lengths of thick marine-grade rope. They moved up the stairs in single file. The house smelled of pot roast and floor wax. It was aggressively normal, a stark contrast to the monster sleeping in the master bedroom. Zip pushed the bedroom door open. It swung silently on well-oiled hinges. Miller was sprawled on his back. His service revolver was on the nightstand, but he would never reach it. Zip signaled. Tiny moved with terrifying speed for a man of his size. He was on Miller before the cop could even open his eyes. One massive hand clamped over Miller's mouth, smothering the scream before it started. In the same motion, Big Earl grabbed Miller's legs. Miller's eyes flew open, wide with primal terror. He thrashed, trying to buck, trying to reach for the gun, but Tiny's grip was like a hydraulic press. Zip stepped forward and pressed a chloroformed rag over Miller's nose and mouth. The thrashing intensified for 3 seconds, a desperate, animalistic panic. And then Miller went limp. They didn't wake his wife. They worked with surgical precision. They bound his hands and feet, shoved him into the canvas sack, and carried him out of the house like a bag of laundry. They were out the back door and into the waiting van in less than 4 minutes. 3 miles away, the scene repeated itself at O'Halloran's apartment. O'Halloran lived alone, which made it easier. He woke up to the feeling of a knee in his chest and the cold reality of duct tape being wrapped around his head. He didn't even get the mercy of the chloroform. He was dragged out, kicking and muffling screams into the gag, thrown into the back of the van next to the unconscious body of his partner. The van pulled away from the curb, driving slowly to avoid suspicion. Zip sat in the passenger seat, lighting a cigarette. "Too easy," Zip muttered. "These guys got soft living out here." "They ain't soft," the driver said, looking in the rearview mirror at the cargo. "They're just bullies. And bullies don't know how to fight when they aren't the ones holding the badge." The drive back to the city was long and quiet. They bypassed the bright lights of Manhattan, sticking to the industrial routes, heading toward the docks. The destination was a derelict warehouse near the Hudson River, a relic of the shipping industry that Bumpy Johnson had acquired years ago for storage. It was isolated, soundproofed by thick brick walls, and smelled permanently of brine and rust. Inside the warehouse, the atmosphere was oppressive. The only light came from a single naked bulb hanging from a long cord in the center of the vast, empty space. Beneath the light, 2 wooden chairs had been bolted to the concrete floor. Miller and O'Halloran were zip-tied to the chairs. Their mouths were sealed shut with heavy industrial tape. When Miller woke up, his head was swimming from the chemicals. He blinked, trying to focus. The first thing that hit him was the smell. It wasn't the smell of the river. It was a sharp, stinging scent that burned his nostrils and made his eyes water. Petrol. He tried to move, but the ropes bit into his wrists. He looked to his left. O'Halloran was there, his eyes bulging, hyperventilating through his nose. Miller looked down at himself. His pajamas were soaked. He was dripping wet. The liquid was cold against his skin, seeping into his pores. The smell was overwhelming now. He was doused from head to toe. Panic, cold and absolute, seized him. He tried to scream, but the tape held fast, turning his cry into a pathetic, muffled moan. He looked around frantically. In the gloom, he saw several open metal buckets placed near a fan, blowing the fumes directly at them. He could only hear the dripping of the liquid from his clothes onto the concrete. Drip, drip, drip. Then, footsteps. Slow, deliberate footsteps echoing on the concrete. Click, click, click. From the shadows, a figure emerged. He was dressed in a pristine black wool coat, a white scarf, and a fedora. He walked with a cane, not because he needed it, but because it was a scepter. Bumpy Johnson stepped into the circle of light. He didn't look angry. He didn't look violent. He looked like a judge walking into a courtroom. Miller froze. He recognized the man immediately. He had seen the mugshots. He had heard the stories. He had laughed at the stories, calling Bumpy a thug in a suit. But seeing him now, in the flesh, Miller realized that Bumpy Johnson was not a thug. He was a force of nature. Bumpy stopped 5 feet away from them. He stood perfectly still, his hands resting on the head of his cane. He stared at them. He didn't blink. It was a haunting stare, a look that stripped away their badges, their authority, and their arrogance, leaving them naked and shivering. He stared at them for a full minute. The silence was louder than any scream. O'Halloran was shaking so hard his chair was vibrating against the floor. Miller was sweating, the sweat mixing with the fluid, stinging his eyes. Bumpy finally moved. He reached out to a small table that had been set up in the shadows. He picked up a crystal glass and a bottle of expensive single malt whiskey. He poured the glass full. The amber liquid glinted under the harsh bulb. Bumpy walked over to Miller. He stood right in front of him. Miller squeezed his eyes shut, expecting to be hit with the bottle. Instead, Bumpy tilted the glass. He poured the whiskey slowly over Miller's head. The alcohol splashed over his face, running into his eyes, mixing with the clear liquid already soaking him. Miller flinched violently, thrashing against the ropes, thinking it was acid, thinking it was an accelerant. Bumpy stepped back. He took a cigar from his pocket. He cut the tip with a small gold cutter. Snip. The sound echoed in the silence. He struck a match. The flame flared up, bright and yellow. Miller and O'Halloran stopped breathing. Their eyes were locked on that tiny flame. It was the only thing in the world. If that flame touched them, they would become human torches. They would die screaming. Bumpy lit the cigar, puffing on it slowly until the tip glowed a bright, angry orange. He shook out the match and dropped it on the floor, inches from the puddle accumulating under Miller's chair. The cops flinched, trying to pull their legs back, their muffled screams rising in pitch. The match was out, but the fear was electric. Bumpy took the cigar from his mouth. He examined the glowing ash. "I know you," Bumpy said. His voice was soft, barely a whisper, but it carried to the corners of the room. "I know your names. Miller, O'Halloran. I know where you live. I know you like to sleep with your windows open in the autumn." He took a step closer, the cigar smoke drifting around his head like a halo. "I know you like to stop women," Bumpy continued. "I know you like to pull them over on dark streets. I know you like to make them beg." He looked at Miller. "You pulled over a blue Cadillac yesterday afternoon. You put your hands on the driver. You laughed." Bumpy leaned in, the cigar inches from Miller's soaked chest. The heat from the ember radiated against Miller's skin. "Do you know who that driver was?" Bumpy asked. Miller shook his head frantically, tears streaming down his face, mixing with the whiskey and water. "Please, God, no." "That was my wife," Bumpy said. "That was Mamie Johnson." Miller closed his eyes. He knew he was dead. He had touched the Queen. He had signed his own death warrant. "You threatened my children," Bumpy said, his voice hardening into steel. "You told her that accidents happen." Bumpy stood up straight. He looked at the two men, pathetic and broken, dripping. "You like money, don't you?" Bumpy asked. "That's why you do it. You shake down the drug dealers, you shake down the numbers runners. You think everyone has a price." The men nodded behind their gags, desperate to agree, desperate to offer anything. "Money. Take the money. We have savings. Take it all." "I don't need money," Bumpy said. He took a long drag of the cigar. The tip glowed brighter. "And I don't need apologies." Bumpy pulled his arm back. He looked like he was about to throw the lit cigar right into Miller's lap. Miller and O'Halloran screamed. It was a primal, muffled shriek of absolute terror. They squeezed their eyes shut. They clenched their muscles, waiting for the explosion of heat, waiting for the end. Bumpy threw the cigar. It arced through the air. It landed on Miller's thigh. Miller screamed again, thrashing, waiting for the ignition. He waited for the whoosh of flame, but nothing happened. The cigar bounced off his wet pants and rolled onto the floor. It sizzled in a small puddle of liquid and went out. Vzzt. Silence returned to the warehouse. Miller opened one eye. He looked down. He wasn't on fire. O'Halloran wasn't on fire. The air smelled of gasoline, coming from the open buckets in the corner. But the liquid soaking his clothes wasn't burning. He looked up at Bumpy. Bumpy was smiling. It wasn't a nice smile. It was the smile of a wolf who had just played with his food. "Oh," Bumpy said, chuckling darkly. "You thought I was going to light you up?" He laughed. The sound echoed off the cold walls. "You thought I was going to burn you alive?" Bumpy shook his head, looking disappointed in them. "Gasoline is dangerous indoors, gentlemen. That's just tap water on your pajamas. The smell, well, that's just for atmosphere." Miller slumped in his chair, sobbing with relief. His chest heaved. He was alive. He wasn't going to die. It was just a scare tactic, just a warning. Thank God. Thank God. "But," Bumpy said. The word hung in the air. Bumpy's face changed. The amusement vanished. The king vanished. What remained was the protector. The man who had shattered a crystal glass in his own hand out of pure rage. "Every good king must slay the monsters from his kingdom," Bumpy said, his voice dropping to a growl. "And you two, you are the worst kind of monsters." Bumpy gestured to the shadows. "We checked," Bumpy said. Zip asked around. It wasn't just Mamie. It was Sarah from the diner. It was Mrs. Gable from the church. It was young girls walking home from school. You didn't just stop them. You hunted them. You touched them. You made them feel small so you could feel big. Bumpy walked toward the door. He turned his back on them. Miller's relief evaporated. The panic returned, colder and sharper than before. "Boys," Bumpy said without looking back, "show them a little Harlem hospitality." From the shadows, Zip, Junie, Tiny, and Big Earl stepped forward. They weren't holding guns. They were holding heavy wooden bats and lengths of lead pipe wrapped in towels. They were rolling up their sleeves. They didn't look angry. They looked focused. They looked like men who had sisters, wives, and daughters. Bumpy opened the heavy metal door and stepped out into the night air. Behind him, the first scream echoed through the warehouse. It wasn't muffled this time. It was the sound of a debt being paid. Bumpy walked to the edge of the pier. He looked out at the dark water of the Hudson River. He lit a fresh cigar. He listened to the sounds coming from the warehouse. He didn't enjoy it. He took no pleasure in pain. But he believed in balance. Miller and O'Halloran had used their hands to hurt women. Tonight, they would learn what it felt like to be helpless. They would learn that the badge was just a piece of metal. And metal doesn't stop a baseball bat. He stood there for 20 minutes, smoking his cigar, watching the moonlight dance on the water. When the noises from the warehouse finally stopped, Zip came out. He was wiping his hands on a rag. "Done?" Bumpy asked. "Done," Zip said. "They're still breathing. Barely." "Good," Bumpy said. "Make sure they stay that way. I want them to remember this. Death is too easy for men like that." "What about the display?" Zip asked. "Like you wanted?" "Yes," Bumpy said. "Do it exactly as I said. And make sure you use the pictures." "The pictures?" "The ones the boys gathered," Bumpy said. "The photos of the women they harassed. I want them to know exactly why they are hanging there." "You got it, boss." Bumpy threw his cigar into the river. It hissed as it hit the water. "Take me home," Bumpy said. "My wife is waiting." The next morning, the sun rose over Harlem, bright and unforgiving. The city woke up to the smell of coffee and the sound of traffic. But on 125th Street, near the subway entrance, the busiest spot in the neighborhood, traffic had stopped. A crowd had gathered. They were standing in a circle, looking up at the lamp post. They were pointing. They were whispering. Some were laughing. Some were just staring in shock. Hanging from the lamp post were two men. But they weren't hanging by their necks. Thick marine rope was knotted tightly around their ankles, suspending them upside down like cured meat. They swayed gently in the morning breeze, roughly 4 feet off the ground. They were stripped to their underwear. Their bodies were a map of bruises, black, blue, and purple welts covering their ribs and legs. Their faces were swollen, their eyes shut tight. They were unconscious, but very much alive. A low, pained moan escaped Miller's lips as the wind spun him slowly, proving to the crowd that this wasn't a lynching. It was a punishment. It was Miller and O'Halloran. But it wasn't just their beaten, inverted bodies that drew the crowd's attention. It was what was taped to them. Covering their chests, their backs, and their legs were dozens of photographs. They were headshots, family photos, and snapshots of women, black women, the women of Harlem. There was a photo of Sarah, the waitress, a photo of Mrs. Gable, a photo of the schoolgirls, and right in the center of Miller's upside-down chest was a picture of Mamie Johnson, cut from the Amsterdam News. Written across their bare chests in red paint was a single word: touch. And below that, on a cardboard sign hanging from Miller's neck, never again. The police sirens wailed in the distance, getting closer. The crowd didn't disperse. They stood their ground. They looked at the two men who had terrorized their wives and daughters, now reduced to hanging meat, humiliated and broken for all the world to see. For the first time in a long time, the people of Harlem didn't look afraid. They looked vindicated. High above the street, in the penthouse at Lenox Terrace, Mamie Johnson sat at the breakfast table. She was wearing a silk robe. The bruise on her cheek was dark and ugly, but she had covered it lightly with powder. She was sipping tea, her hand trembling slightly. Bumpy walked in from the kitchen. He placed a plate of eggs in front of her. He kissed the top of her head. "Eat," Bumpy said gently. "You need your strength." He sat down opposite her and opened the morning edition of the New York Daily News. He didn't look at the front page. He turned to the sports section, acting as if it were any other Wednesday. Mamie looked at him. She saw the bandages on his hand where the glass had cut him. She saw the calmness in his face. "Ellsworth," she whispered. "Yes, baby?" Is it done?" Bumpy folded the paper. He looked her in the eye. "The trash has been taken out," Bumpy said. Mamie nodded. She didn't ask for details. She didn't want to know about the warehouse or the bats. But she needed to know one thing. "Are they?" "They are alive," Bumpy said, his voice even. "I didn't kill them, Mamie. But they won't be police officers anymore. And they won't be coming back to Harlem. They have been resigned." Just then, the phone rang. It was Zip. Bumpy answered it. He listened for a moment, a small, grim smile touching his lips. He hung up. "Turn on the radio," Bumpy said. Mamie reached over and clicked the dial. The news announcer's voice filled the kitchen. "Shocking scene in Harlem this morning, where 2 NYPD officers were found bound and beaten, suspended by their feet from a lamp post on 125th Street. The officers, identified as Patrolmen Miller and O'Halloran, were found alive but suffering from severe injuries. Sources say the officers were covered in photographs of local women. The police commissioner has issued a statement condemning the violence, but has also announced an immediate internal investigation into allegations of misconduct and harassment by the 2 officers following anonymous tips. Mamie listened. She stared at the radio. They were found hanging by their feet, covered in photos. She felt a wave of nausea wash over her. It was brutal. It was medieval. The thought of what her husband was capable of, the violence he could command, scared her. It always had. Bumpy was a dangerous man. But then she remembered Miller's hand on her leg. She remembered his breath in her ear. She remembered the threat against her children. She looked at Bumpy. He wasn't a monster. He was a wall. A high, thick stone wall that stood between her and the wolves of the world. He had done a terrible thing, yes, but he had done it for her. And he had done it for Sarah. And for Mrs. Gable. A tear slid down her cheek. It was a mix of fear, guilt, and a deep, overwhelming relief. "They had photos," Mamie whispered. "Of the women?" Zip thought it was a nice touch, Bumpy said quietly. "Let the punishment fit the crime. They wanted to look. Now everyone is looking at them. Mamie stood up. She walked around the table. She sat in Bumpy's lap, burying her face in his neck. She cried, letting the trauma of the last 24 hours bleed out of her. Bumpy held her tight. He stroked her hair with his bandaged hand. "You're safe," Bumpy whispered. "The kids are safe. Nobody touches you, Mamie. Not while I'm breathing." Mamie pulled back and looked at him. She touched his face. "Thank you," she whispered. "God forgive me, but thank you." "Don't ask God for forgiveness for this," Bumpy said, wiping her tear away. "Justice is his work too. Sometimes he just uses rougher hands to get it done." Bumpy stood up, lifting her with him. "Now," Bumpy said, his voice returning to its usual strength, "go get dressed. Put on your best dress. Put on your diamonds." "Why?" Mamie asked, sniffing. "Because we're going for a drive," Bumpy said. "In the Cadillac." "Ellsworth, I can't drive that car right now." "We are going to drive it," Bumpy said firmly. "We are going to drive down 125th Street. We are going to drive past the police station, and we are going to drive with the windows down." He looked at her with fierce pride. "You are the Queen of Harlem," Bumpy Johnson said, "and queens don't hide." Mamie looked at him. She took a deep breath. She straightened her spine. She felt the steel return to her blood. "Okay," Mamie said. "I'll wear the red dress." "Wear the red one," Bumpy smiled. An hour later, the powder blue Cadillac rolled down 125th Street. The crowd was still there, though the ambulances were taking the battered officers down from the lamppost. As the Cadillac passed, the people turned. They saw Bumpy Johnson in the passenger seat, smoking a cigar. And they saw Mamie Johnson behind the wheel, wearing sunglasses and a red dress, her head held high. The police officers on the scene saw the car too. They saw Bumpy. They saw the look on his face. They looked at their fallen colleagues, disgraced and broken. And then they looked at Bumpy. One by one, the officers turned away. They went back to their work. They didn't stop the car. They didn't wave it over. They let it pass. The message had been received. The king had spoken. And in Harlem, on this day, the streets belonged to the Johnsons. Thanks for listening, folks. If you liked that video and want more, be sure to like the video and subscribe so you don't miss any Bumpy Johnson stories.